So I'll begin. Welcome everyone. Good evening and good morning if someone is joined from New York. Okay, so the session for today is AWS Lambda. Okay, so um, I will try to cover what is basic from this service. So AWS Lambda is one of the service which is provided by the AWS Amazon Web Services. So let's begin. So let's try to understand what is Lambda. So Lambda, you can consider something which runs your website or the processing model of your website or any software where you need some CPU, then this Lambda can act as that CPU. So it constantly scales and scales up and scales down based on the requirements or based on the traffic that your site might experience or your software might experience. So basically, Lambda is used for serverless model. So uh, serverless is something wherein you don't have to manage the servers. It is something which is handled for you by the service provider. So Lambda normally comes into the picture when there is a event and you need to execute something on that event. Like if there is some leaderboard on if there is a match, okay, so in the cricket match if we need to have the live score feed, so there should be something that should trigger once that score is updated. So Lambda basically takes that stream, that is the latest score that is updated, and it eventually passes on to the website where exactly that score should reflect, or it will send it to the global wherever there is a news broadcast. It will send that score to all those broadcast channels. Okay. As I said before, it is a event driven architecture, and it is helpful in processing aspects of your application. Okay, so this is how they have in their logo. So while Lambda was introduced, so basically initially when any of this processing used to happen for softwares or websites, so if there is a larger traffic or if there is a huge demand of that application, then it was difficult for any company to manage and sustain for to meet entire demand. So Lambda was something which would scale dynamically based on the demand, and it will shrink. So cost was something which was considered when the Lambda was introduced. So normally if they would require 10 CPUs, then this Lambda would remove that overhead on those 10 CPUs. They would just need to opt for this service, and the service provider will manage all the CPUs that are required for the processing. So Lambda basically gives you a platform wherein you just need to add your code. So this code can be a JS code or Python code. So you upload that zip, it will do the processing. So like if, as I mentioned before, the score, if needs to be broadcast in multiple channels. So this code will take care of that broadcast part. So once there is some stream of data updated somewhere, it will be sent to the Lambda, and this zip code, the code that we zipped and uploaded into the Lambda will take care that it will broadcast that entire information to multiple channels. In Lambda, normally it remains in the cold state, that is, it won't be active unless it is actively used. Okay, it will remain in inactive state, that is, uh, like any other server. Normally when you put the files or any you host a particular software, it constantly remains active no matter if you are using it or not. But in Lambda it's not like that. Unless you are using it, it will remain, unless you use it, it won't remain active. It will go into the cold state. So once you start using it, it will go into the warm state, and then the overall processing will begin. So to manage the traffic and to scale, it basically executes the code no matter how much traffic it has. If there is inbuilt scaling, if it exhausts, then there is some features which actually gives you the um, provision output. So it will actually enhance the capacity of that Lambda and it will get multiplied. Okay. So if you look at the typical interface, what you see or have in the Lambda, you will find this code block. This code is in the node. Those who are in the developers role, they may understand looking at this. So basically, you just add the code here in the block. It will execute and return the result in the form of what you set in the API. So when you create the API, you set the status code and the body will be the response that you expect. So I'll be giving and I'll be showing a demo how exactly it displays the output. But this is something that is displayed in the interface of this Lambda. Okay. So normally, one workflow that I have explained is regarding the score. The second workflow or the example, what I can give is the weather report. So there are some, if we need to know the global weather, like where, in which country, what is the current state of weather, or is it good for travel, any particular place. So uh, S3 you can consider as a storage service wherein we put all the files or the code that will collect the weather information. Then once user clicks on that interface, this you can consider as a web app. So it will make a request to the API gateway. The API gateway is something you can consider as an entry point. So it will trigger the Lambda. Lambda then execute the code that is being added. It can fetch the information about the weather from the database. So in here, this is DynamoDB is the database that is being used. So it will retrieve the information of that weather, like more meta information about that weather from the DB. It will process the information, it will pass back the response to the API gateway, and then in turn the what you see in the interface is something that is the response from this API gateway. Okay. Similarly, there are other apps wherein if we can consider Alexa. So the Alexa basically works with Lambda. So whatever speech commands that you give to Alexa will go to the Lambda. It will retrieve whatever the information, or if it will retrieve the song or whatever that you request, it will process from the data storage and it will again send back to the Alexa. So this is like another example which you can consider where Lambda is used. Even for the Netflix, while streaming the media videos, Lambda is used. So Lambda is something that is quite in use for big firms and many companies. Okay. So let's just have a look at the demo. So the screenshot what I had put, I have taken the same example. So if you see here, I have given a very simple example. I have just set the status code and I have set the body to it. This test is actually allowing me to configure an event wherein I can give different inputs, like how that Lambda should act on various inputs. Okay, so I can define those as a events. So in here, I have already created a test event. So in test event, I currently don't have anything. So it's kind of blank request. So according to the request from the API gateway, like for example, if I need a weather information, so that the same can be configured here, like the country name or the region, that everything can be passed on to this through this event. And for testing, once you configure that uh, event or that information, like the input information, you can click on test. So once you test it, the Lambda will run in background using the CPU that is being allocated for this Lambda. And in response, it will give me in the JSON form that what you see here, that is a status code, that is a success request, and the body part of it, the plain information, hello from Lambda. So if you see in the function log, it gives you the more information, like how much time it took for the processing, the billing aspect of it, how much bill will be charged, what was the memory that was used. So when I said the CPU, then that was something which is used from that CPU. I mean the memory that is being used. Okay, so we can actually define this memory in configurations. Okay, so there are more aspects when we actually need to check what happens in the background. So in for some case, if our code is very huge, okay, and we are not sure what exactly is going wrong with the code, then this monitor feature actually helps in checking the log of what happens in the background. Okay, what are the events that happen? So if you see here for this timestamp, this is the log stream. So this log stream will have this entire information of the execution. Okay, so you will see how the code ran. So if it is a proper, or if at all it's having some issue, everything, all the details you will find in the log string. Okay, so next part is regarding the configuration. So in order to run this Lambda, we require a role. So this is the basic concept of AWS. So for each service, we will have to define the role. So unless that role has that permission, it won't run. Any of that service won't run. Okay, so it is important that that particular service need a particular role for its execution. Okay, so then there are more aspects, like we can pass the environment variables, then we can put the function URL. So we can now in here in this workflow, we have considered the API gateway. So if I want to skip the API gateway, I can actually put the function URL and it will directly execute this function. So I'm skipping one service while working with this API. Then there are trigger points. Trigger points you can consider as something which will lead to execution of this Lambda. So it can be a stream of data or the API gateway that is connected, or some other operation that triggers Lambda. Okay, so triggers you can add based on the different sources. So if you see the Alexa that I had mentioned, so this Alexa can be added as a trigger point. So there will be details that will be required, like we from which I mean what is the Alexa ID, or how it will be connected. So all those details can be added here, and once it is configured, you will be able to execute this function based on those trigger points. Okay. Yes, so I won't go into the much depth of things, but this is like an basic overview. Okay, so in case if someone wants to, work with this Lambda, or if have any interest going forward, they can just refer to this URL. In case if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me or any of the AWS team members. So yeah, so this was a short and quick introduction to the Lambda.